Sawabona family, today in the classroom, fingers crossed, my tech doesn't go out. Today we will be addressing something that just came across our desk about 20 minutes ago. President Trump's signing of an executive order to dismantle the Department of Education once and for all.
But not only that, as promised, we have Dr. Joaquin Noguera joining us, and we're going to be asking him a number of questions from his keynote at last week's Equity Institute, as well as maybe what might be happening at the future CASA conference. And I think he's going to help us break down these new federal orders. So hang in there, because Critically Conscious Classroom is next.
Microphone check, 1 2 1 2. Welcome to the Critically Conscious Classroom. Today, I'm going to make sure my energy is up, but I'll try not to scream in the mic. In a moment of transparency, I will be honest with you all and let you know that executive order kind of threw, it was a curveball for me. But again, welcome to the Critically Conscious Classroom. I'm one of your co-hosts, as well as the ACSA Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Anthony Robinson.
And I am your other co-host, Dr. Tracy Noriega, Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. We're keeping that title, and Professional Learning Services.
Absolutely.
So welcome so much to number 2, our second show.
Number two. Tracy, one of the things that we didn't do in the first episode, we did a number of things, obviously. My tech went out. We explained who we were, why we're doing this show. But a critical piece that we forgot in our first episode that we'll certainly be doing moving forward is, first and foremost, our land acknowledgement, which I'll go ahead and read for us in a moment. We always start our meetings with a cultural energizer, which I'll definitely let you lead, Tracy. And I think it's very important that we do both of those today, right? So we mentioned in the first episode that there were all of these things coming our way: the NDEI website, the Dear Colleague letter, the talks of dismantling the Department of Education, and seemingly we're here. So it's a very interesting day for me, but this is par for the course. This is part of the work. This is why we exist. So I'm going to go ahead and move us forward with our land acknowledgement, and then Tracy, I'll toss it over to you. So our land acknowledgement says, as we come together today, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of California's first people. Let us acknowledge their past, present, and future contributions to our California culture, as well as their struggles to be resilient and passing on their words, songs, and traditions, and caring for the lands for all to live on. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm on Nisenan land here in Sacramento, as well as Miwok land. So one of the things that I'll ask you all to do, if you don't know what land you occupy, do your Googles. Go ahead and Google what native lands you occupy. And Tracy, you can go ahead and share with us. Obviously, Sacramento's not your home, for those of you all who don't know, but what land do you occupy?
I'm currently on Nisenan land, but I've occupied Muwekma Ohlone land up in the Bay Area, over in the Bay Area, I should say, for a number of years now. But that's not the only land I've occupied. Many of you know that my ancestors are from the Philippines. If you know the history of the Philippines, you know that we were colonized by Spain and then later bought by the United States. And that actually took us to the island of Guam, my grandfather looking for overseas foreign work. And we moved here actually to Sacramento, California when I was in middle school. What a tumultuous time. So I think that acknowledging the land is one way we can think about how the formation of this country came to be. And also our own origins, if you will, right? Because as the Um, as the child of immigrants, the grandchild of immigrants, my journey isn't the same as everyone else's. So it's definitely something to consider if you haven't already.
Definitely, definitely. So I see some folks in the chat, so I'm going to give people a little more time. So again, if you don't know what land you're currently occupying, whether it's a school site, your home, where you're from, go ahead and throw that in the chat for us. And I see Jennifer tapped in with us, Southern My Dude. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, and I did see one pop up from Jose Cubis about Truth Throwdown Thursday. I love that. That's
Yeah,
what we're about to do. That's what we're about to do. So another ritual that we always include, right, Anthony? Whenever we have meetings, we always include these, right? As especially leaders rooted in ethnic studies, we also acknowledge our ancestors, and it is a piece that helps us to understand different histories. Maybe those folks that we haven't normally seen in the history books, but also, right, knowing our own roots, and reclaiming some of those practices that maybe have gotten lost, for lots of reasons. And this, and I can talk about like the melting pot, the mosaic. We can talk about that another time. But I do want to share an ancestor acknowledgement. Usually we pick ancestors in for acknowledgments based on the lesson plan for the day. A lot of times they're ethnic studies activists, or they're social justice activists that help, have been, in the movement. But I'm going to take this opportunity to and acknowledge some ancestors today. And I actually wrote this as a way to acknowledge my ancestors, but it also leads into our cultural energizer, community builder. So please be ready for it. All of you know that I am from poems, right? And this is how I started. And I wrote this for my maternal grandparents and my mom. It goes like this. I am from car grease, from overseas foreign work, to send money home, to build a better life. I am from lumpia, from endless days of cooking, wrapping, selling, to make the American dream come true. I am from kidney failure, from a heart attack, because her heart was broken by the struggle that immigration brought. And some of you know that my dad passed away last week. So behind the smiles today, there is definitely some grieving. I haven't had a chance to write one for him yet, but I will say this for him. I am from resistance, from ancestors who decided not to choose a name from the book, but created our own. That's from my dad. I'll pass back to you, Anthony.
I don't know. I think I was muted, but I'm giving you all the snaps. That was certainly some great poetry. Thank you, Dr. Noriega. So if you're in the chat, I just threw the structure for that poem, which is I am from, I lead from a place, I lead from, and then towards. So if you're courageous enough, we would ask you to follow that format and throw yours in the chat as well. Definitely condolences to Dr. Noriega, the whole Takamolila family, the whole Noriega family. Thank you, for sharing that. And I'm going to share my poem with you all. So I didn't just cook this up on the spot. I'm not, I don't want to front, but this is an activity that Tracy shared with a network group that we were a part of a couple of days ago. So I had some time. I had about 2 minutes to cook this up, and I've changed a couple of words, but the ancestors that I acknowledged were both the ancestors that I've met and those who I haven't. So my poem says, I'm from the backwoods of fields soaked in the blood of kings and queens. I am from the love that permeates from the kitchen when the hot pot of greens is stewing. I lead from a place of brilliance and bravery because my parents never got to truly live out their missions and dreams. I lead from a courageous heart and a mission-driven life, both encouraged by the dreams of my ancestors toward a lifelong legacy filled with and fueled by justice. So again, Dr. Noriega, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the snap.
Snaps for you.
Yeah, can we get some snaps in the chat? Again, we dropped the format for you. If you're able to, please follow that format. We would love to hear your or read at least your ancestor acknowledgement.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I didn't get into the I lead from, but I'm glad that you shared yours.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think speaking of leading, should we get into this conversation about these new federal executive orders?
I was trying to run from it. I'm not even gonna lie to you. But yeah, I'm ready to. So uh, do we are we ready to bring our guest on?
Yeah,
Because
yes. So while you all are putting hopefully some of your I am from poems in the chat, we're actually going to bring on Dr. Joaquin Noguera. Some of you got to hear his amazingness last week at the Equity Institute. I'll say that Joaquin and I were brought together by the amazing Dr. G. Reyes of Cal State East Bay, together with Dr. Orlando Carrion from Sonoma State University. And we formed this pretty dope panel for the University Council of Educational Administration. Did you all know that existed? Because, I guess, I don't know, in my, we've kind of been busy, right, with the TK through 12 world. But we put together this G put together this panel of us folks, and I was like, we need to get Joaquin in front of our folks because we have so much to talk about. So Dr. Noguera, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. In a tradition that I am a part of, I just want to say I send loose some light to you, Tracy, and to your whole clan, your whole family. I believe that our ancestors, even those who have recently transitioned, stay with us always and can give us energy and protection. So I send some light to your father also and to the rest of your family. But thank you for having me, y'all. I appreciate just you all creating this space. I'm calling in from Gabrielino Tongva land. I live in the Pasadena area. And yeah, where do we begin?
well, we had, plans always get disrupted, right? So we had all of these wonderful things, which we're still going to talk about, that we're going to lead into this beautiful conversation that we're going to have. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, we'd be remiss if we didn't start out by at least acknowledging and spending some time discussing President Trump signing this executive order to begin dismantling the Department of Education. And I want to start out by reading some things that were offered by CBS News. Um, it said that when he began this process and he signed off on everything about half an hour ago, um, that his goal was to dismantle the Department of Education, his words, not mine, once and for all. Um, he went on to say, we're going to eliminate it and everybody knows it's right. Um, After that, he said, "We're not doing well with with the world of education in this country, and we haven't for a long time." Um, and I'll end here. He says, "The U.S. spends more money per pupil, yet we rank near the bottom of the list in terms of success." So that's a lot to digest, right? Um, but let's start there. So, before you say anything, Dr. Noguera, I do want to offer to the audience. Uh, Dr. Noguera had a really busy morning, so I just actually dropped this in his lap about 15 minutes ago. So everything that you're going to get from him is going to be a raw response. Nothing was rehearsed. As I mentioned in our first show, we are 100% live. So, Dr. Noguera, thoughts, feelings, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, no, well, I appreciate you putting that in my lap. Um, the first thought that comes to me was that as you said that, I looked at my phone, and of course, I had a bunch of notifications that I hadn't checked. And while you all were doing the introduction, I opened it up and I just saw a quote from the president of the National Student Legal Defense Network, which states, quote, let's be clear. There's no executive order the president can sign to legally eliminate the Department of Education. Linda McMahon acknowledged that herself. The real effect of this decree will just be even more hardship and confusion for students and families. So that alone it reminds me, and I'm grateful for that reminder that maybe it's like not even a surprise. Maybe this is showing my educational, I'd be staying in the books. It makes me think of Freire. In a book he wrote, The Politics of Education, he asserts, you cannot know in isolation.
Right.
You can't know all by yourself. Now, there are things that only you have experienced, and the reality is, though, even when you may have been the only one to experience it, as soon as you engage others, you'll realize, oh, this is not entirely unique. Like, there are aspects that are unique, but this is a part of a larger pattern that other folks experience. And maybe there are even people who have been writing about this for years. Like, maybe this is well known, right? So, he has made assertions about this being deserved, this being something that he hopes the Democrats agree with, been failing for a long time. I'm somebody who's been openly critical, right? I come from other educators who have been critical of the education system, and we follow in the lineage of recognizing education as this space, this mechanism that can be a part of transformation of individual and collective lives, but that more often than not is actually a part of keeping things the way they are. I think so. There's validity to the critique of our system of education, but the idea that we should dismantle it and throw it all away is something that I, even at the ACSA conference, spoke about as being a reflection of violence. It's a form of violence. It makes me think of a quote from Tacitus, who was a Roman historian. He said that they created a desert and called it peace. Right? This is kind of a colonial paradigm. Right? Just blow it up, just destroy the whole thing, level it, right? And then we have peace. I see this as an act of continuing violence. Right? I was actually talking with some relatives yesterday about how do we interpret what's been coming out of the White House since he took office again. And what we concluded was, to some degree, like, this is their freedom dream. This is what right-wing, fascist-oriented, conservative-minded folk see as freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It is like, let's not talk about race anymore. Let's leave that history behind. Let's just do away with all of that stuff. Right. And then we can be free. We can be back to America as we conceptualize it. And I think that is something that kind of speaks at like a rot that has been given a platform, a rotting that and there's a degree of neglect there. Like, who allowed them to get to this point of miseducation? Right. Just to make another connection here, I just saw Sean Harper's post on LinkedIn. He shared an article he wrote in Forbes about like the limits of allyship, and that this is the time now where if you consider yourself an ally, especially if you consider yourself a co-conspirator, now is when you speak up, right? Because that silence is actually violence. That silence is being complicit. And I think now is the time where he got to learn. He got to learn that he's knowing in isolation. Like, he's stepping up on his platform and projecting these kind of rotten freedom dreams as if they are fact. But there are so many people who know more, know better, right? People that are close to him that do. And we got to call them in. They gotta actually somehow feel something, show and prove which side you're on, right? These are old sayings. Which side are you on? Right? Where are we at? What are we? The house is burning, y'all. Are we really just going to watch it burn? Are people going to speak up? Are they going to say, "Hey, you're burning down our home"? What are we doing? So that's I guess this is a kind of stream of consciousness. I'm unloading on all of you, but I think of this as the time where those who have sat back and kind of wondered where this was going to go. The playbook was out there before they took office. We see where it's going. They're staying true to their playbook, and it's time to get activated. Time to get a little bit louder.
Yeah. Naj and Edgar had Dr. John Smith, former Secretary of Education, I think, from under President Obama, 2015-16, yesterday on the legislative lunch break. And he kind of talked about this, right? Like what is our responsibility? And for the most part, yes, states have a lot of control over what happens in education. And the Department of Education, again, according to acts of Congress in the late 60s, right? The Elementary Secondary Education Act, IDEA, all result of the civil rights movement, the Office of Civil Rights, right? And I know that we have an NDI page and all of that stuff coming out of there, and maybe the cases that were cases aren't cases anymore in the Office of Civil Rights. But what he said and what's been sticking with me, and it's been it's been circling in my head, and I told Anthony about this, was exactly what you said, Joaquin, because it really is up to us to kind of step up. Do we have leaders in place that are trying to see this? So if you think about the states having all this control over education, and the Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Education at the federal level was created to balance the imbalanced, if you will, right? Because states, right, all look different, but if they have so much control, they potentially are neglecting some really underserved communities and further perpetuating the education debt, et cetera. So if here in California, a question for us, Marty talked about this last time too, like, who has been neglecting us? Like, do we have the right leaders in place, right, at every level to balance the imbalance, right? To continue to protect our underserved communities, to make sure that education really is, the opportunity to advance in life, to really know what's up. But I think we talked about this at the Equity Institute too. Like, we're doing a lot of really good things, because if we weren't, then why are we getting attacked, right? Why is education, getting attacked? But to the point of, it's all strategy, right? If the masses don't know anything, if the masses can't read, if the masses don't understand, if the masses continue to stay in fear and in chaos, then how do you organize against, something like this? But that's what we're about. That's why we are here.
Absolutely. I was reminded also today in a conversation with some colleagues. I have the pleasure of working with Dr. Kenzo Sung, who actually grew up in Berkeley like me, and he's at Loyola Marymount University as well, like myself. We were discussing a paper, and he argued something that I had needed to be reminded of. Leadership is not just a role, right? It's not just a position. It's not just the people who get to wear the suits. Leadership is about practice, or praxis, right? And so I think it's really important, not just for educators to be reminded of, but community members, not just citizens, but people, the human beings that we interact with, the human beings that are listening to this. Leadership is practiced, right? And so I'm reminded of Peter Senge. I went to a workshop once with him on systems change, and he talked about the root word of behind lead, to lead. That the origins of the word leadership and to lead are related to the idea that one extends themselves beyond a boundary. Folks always talk to me about my father passing me a torch, and I'm like, yeah, but some of us actually like to play with fire. Well, for those who play with fire, right, what does it mean to push the limits, to extend ourselves, to check the boundaries of what's possible,
Right.
right? The limits and the possibilities. We are presented with some serious limitations when we have folks in positions of leadership that are taking the position that these folks are. But the leadership doesn't stop there, right? Each of us can be leaders. Each of us can be pushing. It goes back to that old saying, right? Ask for forgiveness, not permission. And I
Right.
think there's going to be a need for the states, but also cities and other local entities to push the limit of what's possible in response to these acts of aggression, these acts of violence on us, on our collective consciousness, or on our systems that we rely on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I love this question from Shireen Sasser
Yeah.
in the chat. How do we step up? Because yes, I'm sincerely looking for ways to do that. So how do we step up? So I think about what you shared at the Equity Institute, Joaquin, about the difference between um, a soldier and a warrior, because I feel like, to Shireen's point, or to Shireen's question, like there is a difference. But I also know that, not everyone is in more liberal spaces, right? Not everyone can be their most authentic selves in the systems they are working in, and they have this amazing navigational capital to try and maneuver through the system, right? Without jeopardizing the work, right? So they may not be um, totally, vocal, but they're doing the work, right? They're putting their head down and they're doing the work. Maybe they're not necessarily known for, maybe they don't have the title in their name, but I don't know. Can you talk about that a little bit more, Joaquin? The difference between a soldier and a warrior, and in this case, an equity warrior.
Sure. Yes. Um, I heard the term equity warrior being thrown around a lot, and I appreciate that energy. I appreciate folks asserting, like, I'm here to fight for equity. Um, and I was raised by people, who were involved in political struggles from before I was born, who were also at times martial artists involved in physical combat. And I guess when I hear that, I immediately think, all right, then I expect you to know how to fight. And Mike Tyson once famously said, "Everybody got a plan until they get punched in the face."
Right.
Right? And then all of a sudden, instincts sometimes take over, like fight or flight kicks in. Um, I think this is part of why I included those slides where we talk about power. Right? I had big fish eating the smaller fish, because when you are targeted, when the fight comes to you, you're not always ready. And sometimes people are ready, which is why they come for you, right? They're ready, you're not. And 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 that's where connection is going to be really important. Communication, understanding your context is going to be really important. I've been reminded several times in the past couple of months by relatives, like, you don't want to put a target on your own back, right? And if you keep this work up, you will be targeted. It's part of the work that we're involved in. We know when we challenge power, power is going to push back, if not attempt to extinguish the fire we're bringing. So for me, I lean towards looking at successful resistances across time and space, across history. And there are times when an opposing force has to step out into the open and openly challenge the aggressor, right? The powerful. Uh, but long before and after that happens, and even while it's happening, there are other battles that must be taken on. So I have folks that I work with and mentor down in conservative parts of California where they're not even allowed to say the word oppression in the classroom. And the work looks very different there. They have to be much more careful than, let's say, I do in an institution of higher education,
Right.
right? Or some districts that have been very openly pushing back and saying we're going to continue to do equity work, and we know that there's no option for us. We're going to keep plowing forward. In those spaces, people are able to mobilize and show and prove, right, that the work is going to continue. And in spaces where educators might be a bit more targeted and it's more hostile towards social justice or equity work, they have to be very clear that they should not be doing this work in isolation, right? Don't make the same mistake these folks are making, right? That to know in isolation. There is a need to be connected. Part of the presentation I shared to ACSA was around relationality and relational accountability. I argued that isolation, stress, and fatigue are the recipes for death, disease, and disaster. We can intentionally interrupt each one of those, the isolation, the stress, and fatigue. And if we focus just on the isolation, that part of what that means is we need to be building bridges. We need to be actively working in community. If we're not already, it's time to start building community. It's time to start getting involved with the organizations and the people that are doing this work or that are even like-minded. You know, I think there's still power in the old strategies, right? Paulo Freire talked about reading literacy as learning to read the word and the world. I heard at this podcast recently where folks were saying like to engage in conversation with just one other person is a physical practice of imposing order on chaos. At the very least, we need to be in dialogue. If you don't have somebody to talk to at home or in your workplace, we need to reach out. We need to actually form those communities. If you see folks working in isolation, invite them, engage. The conversation is the bare minimum, but it's through that conversation that we can then work towards a shared understanding of what we are willing to do and then plans to do it, right? This is not the time for complacency. This is the time to huddle up, to figure out what our power is and where it is and what we're going to do about it. So I believe in, not just sitting back and watching the cards drop, but working together to find the solutions. I can't pretend that I have all of the how-tos because that's going to look different in different communities based on the context, based on the different assets of the community, the knowledge and the skills. So that's what I would say. I would say now's the time to connect.
So, Dr. Noguera, we are running extra long time, and I'm so happy with everything that you said, but I'm mad because time is sometimes our enemy. But I wanted to just ask one quick question because I think this is very important. So, you talked about your family, you talked about community, and one of the things that I heard you speak about last week at the Equity Institute was the 7 generations principle. And this might be a huge ask, but in a minute or two, can you kind of break down to us what that is? And ultimately, what is the impact on us as individuals, as students, and as educators?
So the 7 generations principle is kind of it's an indigenous concept, a concept that I first read about from an article by Cindy Blackstock. She's a Canadian scholar who wrote about the idea that what we do in this life is a reflection of the 7 generations that came before us, and will have an impact on the 7 generations that move forward, that are to come. When I read that, I was doing my dissertation. I was also working across several communities. I was working on an indigenous language immersion study, and I was working on my dissertation. And I could not help but apply what I was doing as a research assistant to my research, right? And in thinking about indigenous paradigms, indigenous worldviews, 7 generations being one of them, thinking about what does that mean for, in East Oakland, for example, the Black, Latine, Asian Pacific Islander communities that were being served by Roses or other surrounding schools. And it didn't take all that much for me to transfer it over, right? This idea that like we we are the physical manifestation of our ancestors. Right? You can even look in your face. It's part of why I tell my children, appreciate your features. You got those from the people who came before you. I see in those eyes. That's my mommy's eye. That's my daddy's smile. Right? That's
Right.
that grandma's smile.
Right.
Right? We are that. To act with intention by holding that knowledge, to hold that knowing with with the mindset for clarity around the future, right? I also read like there are some amazing Pacifica or Moana Pacific Islander, specifically Maori scholars who write about us walking backward into the future. We all we can really know is the past, right? So we don't know what the future holds. We have to we walk backwards into the future with this past that we can know. If we can do that and we can keep clear intentions for our seven generations to come, I think that we can plant the seeds of transformation intentionally. And I think I get motivated by that. I think that's powerful. I think that gives me that, it speaks to, it's like Sankofa, it's like Inglakesh, it's like so many paradigms that I think are useful for us to be intentional about a sustainable and just world, creating a sustainable and just world. So I forgot your question, but I think I addressed
I think
part
that
of it.
I think that
You
was it.
you answered it. You
Yeah.
answered it, and I think we'll pause it right there and leave everyone with the cliffhanger. We're certainly going to have to bring you back. Um, so I know Tracy got to give you flowers for about 5 minutes. So I'll make mine a little brief. Dr. Noguera and I actually met last week, our first time. Um, and this is certainly my brother, right? So I'm really excited uh, to have met you last week. I'm excited to have you so quickly be on our show. But I'm over the moon excited to have you back so that we can take a deep dive into all of the other things that you have going on. So um, flowers, Jordans, medallion, whatever you like. All all the gratitude to you, my friend. Really appreciate
Likewise.
you. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you both. Appreciate you both creating this space and just creating time for folks to engage like this. Appreciate the audience for tuning in and being a part of this. I see the chat is popping,
Yeah.
and I just hope you all will continue this conversation. Right, that there's good medicine in that.
Absolutely. And it keeps us from isolation,
Right.
right? I think this is, Anthony and I have been really intentional about trying to build community in different ways. So, for all y'all that don't know, we have an equity administrators network that meets monthly. We actually have a meeting tomorrow. So, if you're interested in that, shoot me an email and we'll make sure that you get the link. It was created to provide support for folks that had diversity, equity, inclusion in their titles, but we also know that there's a lot of folks that are just equity warriors, regardless of their whether or not the word is in their title. So that's coming up next, and I know you'll be at CASA, right? The CASA conference next week, the California
Yep.
Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators, talking about the after effects of Brown versus Board.
Yes, looking
Yeah.
forward to that. I get to share, be a part of a panel. It's gonna
We
be
also
time.
have, oh, sorry. See,
No,
this
I'm
is
sorry. Go ahead.
um, I was just again thinking about all the things that are happening next, in terms of spaces to be in. ACSA has our Lead with Pride Summit at the end of April. So if you folks want to be in community, that's another amazing space. Of course, on top of the Equity Summit that we just had, or the Equity Institute we just had, and then CASA coming up, another opportunity with a sister organization of ours. Right. Thank
All right.
you. Thank you,
Until
brother
next.
Joaquin. I'll see you soon.
Much
We're
love, y'all.
have you on the
Appreciate you.
show. Okay.
Throw it back to me. Throw it
Wow.
back to me. Throw it back to me. Throw it back to me. we got to wrap this up. They're trying to wrap us up, and they actually told us that to end now. But this is live, and I'm not ending now, so I'll get in trouble later. Just real quick. So, Dr. Noriega mentioned Lead with Pride will be in Anaheim April 30th to May 2nd. Also want to let anybody know who's going to be in the San Luis Obispo area. I will be at the ACSA Mid-State Conference moderating a panel, individuals from CAPL, CALSA, CASA, and our LGBTQ network. So catch me in San Luis Obispo. Dr. Noriega and I will also be at the CASA conference in Los Angeles. We are presenting, and that is going to be called the name of our show, The Critically Conscious Classroom. So I know they're wrapping this up. We went over time, but real quick, Dr. Noriega, I know that we do this for the babies. That's ultimately what it's about. So I just want to real quick shout you out because you're going to be a grandma soon. Right?
I am. And so, this idea of 7 generations, right? And this idea, when we think about community responsive leadership, where that the framing is that you ultimately know your responsibility as a leader. The things that you are leading on are relevant to the community. The community tells you, right? A lot of times we might have titles, but the community determines if you are a leader or not, or if they want to follow you. And then all about relationships. So I think about all of that, and I think about the responsibility piece, especially because I think about am I making the right decisions? What are the ramifications, not just for the babies in front of me in the school right now, right, or in the district right now, but their babies. And I have students that have kids already. So, I like to say that I think I made some pretty good, decisions for, my former students and their kids. But yes, I have a little grandchild coming this summer. And I really want this world to be a much better place for my little multiracial munchkin that is coming soon. Absolutely.
Definitely. So congratulations to you, to your daughter, to my brother Renee. Real quick before I close this out, another shout out. I want to give a shout out in that spirit to part of my 7 generations, my children, London and Kyle, who got me this crew neck. That's why I got it on. So shout out to them. They went on a Disney cruise while I was at the Equity Institute. They also told me, do not do the Chuck Wolverine 2 and 2. So I won't do that, but we're going to go ahead and close out because we are way over time. Thank you again for registering. Thank you for showing up. Just real quick, as Dr. Noriega mentioned, she did lose her father. So she will be away. So instead of 2 weeks, we're going to push it back 3 weeks. So we'll be back with you all. I believe it's April 10th. But in the meantime and in between time, please share this with your community, rewatch it, and advocate for more people to jump into this fight. So we will see you on the other side. Peace.
Take care, everybody.